Okay, we are all live now. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining in this wonderful panel discussion brought to you by Synapse QA. The topic of the panel discussion is quite interesting. Is non-functional a misnomer in testing? And to discuss this with us today, I have four wonderful guests. And without any further delay, I would like the guests to introduce themselves. I will start with the ladies. So, Sandra, how about you going first?
Thank you, Brajesh. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you're from. So, I'm Sandra John, and I'm residing in Pune, in India. I'm currently working as a performance engineering lead with ZS Associates. I have approximately around 10 years of experience behind me, all of it being in QA. I started off as a manual test engineer and worked my way up from manual to automation and now in performance testing. So yeah, that's my body of work. Thank you, everyone. Great to see everyone here.
Awesome. Now, Soumya.
Yes, so I'll go next. I'm Soumya Shridharamurthy. I'm living in Netherlands. I work as an engineering manager quality at Lito. I started as a developer back in Bangalore, and then I grew into different roles as a part of a Scrum team or an Agile Scrum team. Quality has always been along with me for last 17 years, 18th year going strong. So pretty much I can say I've always done a dual role, which has put me in a very unique spot in identifying the problems as well as the solution and making my way in whatever the challenge I have as a part of this industry. I'm a one thing I can talk a lot about the whole day, but one thing I clearly want to associate myself is I help guide teams in inclusive development, which means accessibility is an epicenter in my entire 17 years of career. So I'm very super proud of it. That's about me.
Fantastic. Okay, Eldad. Eldad.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Eldad Uzman. I'm in Israel, Netanya. I have been involved in the tech industry for roughly around 13 years, and I started as an automation developer. This was my start, and I started from a company that deals with low-level communication. So I had some experience with performance at low level. Okay, so low-level communication performance. And then over time, I started to shift into the more casual term of performance engineering or performance assurance in the more higher level, so cloud computing and stuff like that. And I'm also involved in the functional testing, which we will discuss today. But I'm also involved with that as an automation architect. I think that the words we use have a meaning. And when we misuse the words, we create confusion. So I would like to dive into that today. But performance is a very close thing to me, as well as accessibility. So Soumya, you brought it up. Accessibility is very important. And we will discuss about this topic as well today.
All right. And finally, last but not the least, senior performer, Leandro.
Thank you, Rajesh. Hello, everybody. I am Leandro Melendez, also known as Senior Performer. I am a DevRel performance advocate with K6, as you may be able to see. I have been a bit over 20-something years in the IT industry. The first 10 in development projects and everything related to the first steps of the software development lifecycle. Then, as a consultant, I spent a little over 10 years in performance testing projects, gathering lots of experience and many performance testing flavors, if you want to call it. Also, dipping my toes in all the other flavors of testing and QA areas. Personally, right now, you may have seen this face, this mustache in the YouTube channel. I often give talks where I am the host of Perfect's Espanol and co-host at times in the Perfect's English podcasts. And YouTube channels, a book if you want to learn a little bit more about traditional performance load tests, the Hitchhiking Guide to Load Testing Projects. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. And finally, I'll just introduce myself in a couple of sentences. I am a principal consultant with Infosys, and I'm also the Chief Enablement Officer with Test Chat Community. So that's about me. Let's dive in straight into the discussion. And I'll throw this open to all of you. But the topic is quite interesting. Is non-functional a misnomer in testing? And I want to start with you, Eldad. What do you make of this?
It could be a misnomer, okay, because the root of non-functional testing is actually non-functional requirements, and this actually came from product designers or product managers, and they care about the product, right? They only care about what the end user might experience or what the end user might prefer and stuff like that. So they wanted to divide the requirements between those which are behavioral, okay, things that the end user would like and would anticipate or prefer, and the non-functional is actually qualities. Okay, so the qualities of the system as far as performance, security, and all the other stuff. And then when testers wanted to act upon it, they kind of use the same terminology. So when the terminology shifts from one realm to another, it could create those problems. Okay, and it could be a misnomer if it's not used properly.
Okay, that's an interesting take. Sandra, how about you?
Yeah, British. So, what I think is it is also sort of a misnomer only because, as Eldad actually was listing all of the areas of testing that we do, like performance, security, and accessibility, and everything. When we start dividing it into a functional and non-functional area, there is a chance where, a lot of a very broad area of testing is being missed out. And the only reason is that there are so many people, when you talk about from where the requirements are coming, right, it is coming from the top down level. And at that point of time, there is so much of emphasis on just the on just the functional testing part of it. That is where, these all of these areas are being missed out on. And because we are calling it non-functional, somewhere it is being interpreted as it is optional. That is where, we miss out on doing a lot of quality testing, and a lot of issues, bugs, defects, problems can get, are missed in that area then.
It's quite interesting that you point out that there is a tendency of making it optional, and that's where slip-ups do occur.
Yeah.
I agree with you on that. Yeah. So, Soumya, what do you think about the term being a misnomer?
So, because there is two people who voted for it, just to spice up this conversation of the panel discussion, I would shift to the other side of the table to say it may not be a misnomer to as much as we think it is, in fact. Now, yeah, for sure. When we see the epicenter, which is a requirement, which is applications functions, which is the bread and butter, the revenue generator of running a company, takes the center stage, and everything around it is kind of a periphery. It's very strange that in my this long year of career, I've never used much of a non-functional test, but I always use the term peripheral test, which I guess we'll dig into it some part during the panel discussion as well. But I don't see it as a misnomer or distraction in any way, as long as we know how we are presenting the case for its needs and how is it impacting the solution or the value delivery we are doing for a customer. So it's always a perspective that we want to represent, and who is represented, who is representing this in an organization. Saying that, I'll stop here so that I can pick on others when I come to my point again. I hope it's okay.
That's a very interesting take, Soumya, and especially thank you for being the Arnab Goswami here. Arnab Goswami, the famous TV show host who is known for setting the
Saying
cat
the
setting the cat amongst the pigeons. So thank you for doing that. Now, Leandro, what's your take on non-functional being a misnomer?
Even from the moment that I started, I felt off when hearing that that's functional. Probably it has some subjectivity from my perspective, being a performance engineer. Like, wait, why is we are non something, like we are not part of the team or part of the whole plan? Why do I feel excluded as a non-functional? And I do feel that it is a big misnomer. I think it comes a little bit from the perspective that most of the focus on QA and testing in the industry is functional testing in one way or another. Started with manual, was mostly functional what we were doing, but always in my head was like, wait, but if the non-functionals do not work well or are not passed, the system doesn't function. So why is it not non-functional? That never made sense in my head. Always personally threw me at a confusion or internal monologue saying like, this is not right. Something feels really off with this. And as many others have mentioned, it's an important area that should be paid attention, the functional side. But everything else is huge, and we are not paying that much attention to it because of this label that we're putting to all the other universes of QA that we can have.
Now, quite interestingly, when you get into conversations with people like James Bach, Michael Bolton, Cem Kaner, who have spent years, not only doing testing but also researching a lot about it and talking a lot about it. They've also pointed out at this glaring thing about non-functional being a misnomer. Now, I want to come back to Soumya because she brought up a very interesting point. And she said that she wants to take the other stand. So, Soumya, I'm going to pick on you. Now, not just from a perspective of testing, but thinking out loud in the whole engineering perspective. If we take performance for an example, okay, performance is now we don't talk about performance testing so much. We talk more about performance engineering. And you are an engineering manager, like you said. So when you want to build a team and when you want to educate your team, how do you go about educating your team in something like performance engineering? What facets of performance engineering would you want to focus on and say, okay, pick up these things? And how do you bring that relationship without being fussy about whether it's functional or non-functional?
So, Bijesh, yeah. So when it comes to not the core aspect functionality of an application, but the peripheral aspect of an application, there needs to be a shared understanding at various levels, starting from the development team itself, where the actual work happens, and an upward communication should happen that what is our baseline and how are we achieving this. Most engineering teams are going to miss this, and I kind of feel that they have an assumed thought process that people will understand when I use a certain keywords. As far as I have seen, the keywords that we use back in Bangalore when it comes to a quality engineering, vis-a-vis some keywords which is misunderstood or misrepresented in this side of the earth, at least in Netherlands, it's we have a glaring effect. So it's very important in the team we understand the keywords and what keywords for them according. I mean, like how are they gonna connect themselves in the thought process for these keywords? It's very important that we establish a shared understanding. When we are starting an application to be developed, it is the role of an architect is a very important. They are the one who's gonna come up with the baseline saying, okay, if you're coming up with a retail application, what should be our minimum baseline that we say, okay, beyond this, we are not gonna tolerate. We minimum have to reach to this level of performance when it comes to the code. And this common understanding is set across all the Scrum teams. And when a code review or code is developed, tested, everything is against this baseline. Now, this is a first step. We can always sharpen it to make it more radiant. That is like the next level of improvements keeps coming in. But when we start with development, this is established and this is written somewhere already discussed, and this is how we are going forward from an engineering perspective. When it comes to the quality, it is a part of your done criteria. And The only challenge that I feel right now in the name of left shift is you want to include all your testing as a part of your Scrum team testing activity, which is kind of glaring and can be too much, right? So this is how I approach. If there is something that we're going to start, we set up a shared understanding, and then we work towards the goal. And every iteration we kind of improve on top of that, and include it as a part of your acceptance criteria so that we know what we want to achieve.
Okay, quite interesting. And you've again brought up the point of functional versus peripheral. And I'm going to come to you on that at a later part of the discussion. Now I want to go to Elda. And, Elda, growing outside of performance testing, if we just start looking at areas such as usability, such as user experience or accessibility, security, there is a whole gamut of things. We understand that these aspects need the need a system that's functioning very well, and we need to go through the steps or the standard operating procedure to arrive at a certain baseline for usability, accessibility, and for a certain standard. So, which means that you are basically exploring all the functionality in the application. So even though these terms are classified as non-functional, you are still touching upon the functional aspect of it. So still, why is it referred to as non-functional is a question that I want to ask you.
Well, it's a very interesting question. I think the question is deep. It is really deep, and in my opinion, I might be wrong on this, but in my opinion, because these terms came out of product or product management, so I think that there is an inherent bias to the way these terms were generated, because when a product, it's very easy to see the effects of application behavior on the user experience. It's very easy to see that. But once you start to look at things like performance, you start to think about not a single user. You start to think about maybe a collective of users, or worse than that, it's not just thinking whether the button is colored in one color or in another color, or the text is one text or another, but you start thinking about matrices. Okay, you start thinking about response times and CPU utilization and stuff like that. It's something that is very difficult to connect with, something very difficult to relate to when compared to the behavioral stuff. When you talk about accessibility, again, it's not very easy to connect to this, because most of the people in the tech industry are healthy, quite intelligent, quite literate, young, so mid-20s to early 40s, most of them, not all of them, but most of them are men, most of them are very technologically capable. So it's not easy to think about an individual who's having a harder time, individual who has more difficulty in mobility or hearing or visual impairments and stuff like that. It's not easy to relate to this. So I think that the bias is pretty rooted in the process. And again, a non-functional could be a misnomer if it amplifies this bias further. Okay, that's my take on this. So I think that we should overcome these biases by, first of all, acknowledging them. Okay, understanding that there is a bias that is natural within humans, and then the terminology can be more easily defined or easily understood.
Well, very interesting point. I think the most interesting takeaway from what you said is working on the biases. And of course, if you look back at how these terms come into the industry, more appropriate thing is to talk about the marketing material of the tools that come out. Okay, if somebody is selling a tool, let's say for automation, then they would obviously introduce terms such as manual testing, which never existed in the market. Okay, initially, but and similarly for performance, you will have non-functional. Okay, something that deals with functionality. This is a non-functional aspect. So probably marketing has got a role to play, and then you spoke about biases, which is quite interesting. I want to
Yeah, I
come
mean,
to
think for excuse just one
Sorry,
tiny
go ahead,
word. Think
go ahead.
about security. Think about security testing. Okay, so most of the time, it's very easy to think about a naive user, someone who just did a typo or stuff like that. It's not very easy to think about malicious users, about
Yes.
someone who really wants to damage your system. It's not easy to think about this. That's the real point.
Yes. And on that note, I want to come to you, Sandra. Is it something to do with the way we are trained in testing, that we carry on these biases and then stick on to these terms such as non-functional, functional, and there are many more in the industry. So since we are talking about non-functional, do you think that these biases that we have are responsible for the way we are taught testing in the industry?
That's a very interesting question, Prajesh, because I was actually just thinking about it when Eldad was talking about biases, and I was just thinking about, from where does it, start taking root from? And personally as well, when I started off as a QA, right, the emphasis or even the introduction towards performance testing or security testing or accessibility testing was not done initially. The more emphasis is that this is the product, this is the way you test it. You have to find these defects, and then, we just have to push it out. And as you grow in the industry, that's when you understand that that is not the only aspect to it. There are a lot more things that needs to be done. But when you're starting off that time, you're introduced to testing only in such a manner that if somebody who is coming directly, say, out of a college or out of an institute, and just starting work, that is when, until and unless you've been taken on as a specialist role, if you're just taken on as a broader testing group, that is when you started off with, say, manual testing or say automation testing. And also because I think these are the terms that are very prominent when they're being taught. That is the time, even during the teaching phase, that time, manual testing, automation testing, they're repeated quite often. But say something as a performance testing or say accessibility testing, security testing, they're not discussed that often. Or even when you come on board, that time, you're not introduced or given the right tools to get started with it.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point that you brought, Sandra. Now, continuing on that, I want to come to you, Leandro. Now, you specialize in doing performance testing, and you've written a book as well. So you are speaking to a lot of people, a lot of customers. Uh, do they also see it like this? That okay, this is a non-functional aspect. It is not that important for me. I will focus more on the functionality and push out all the features as much as possible. You see that trend?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the project perspective, many organizations are like, I should care that the project functions, that my software is good. And they, as you very well mentioned, focus on that part. And that non-functional, the performance, something we won't pay attention to it generally. Many of them, I would say, don't do. And they come to us asking for services when I used to do consulting services, when everything was on fire and they were having already many, many problems, which aligns with this bias because, as Sandra mentioned earlier, and I think Eldad as well, performance, and this is my general rant, performance testing is not the same as load testing. Everyone starts to think about concurrency and trying to push the system and all those type of things, where many, many projects that I would arrive at, and I was asked to start automating for a load test and all those things, I would find a single function, a single user, just me, clicking on it, taking 5, 10, 15, 20 seconds, which, if you ask me, is not functional anymore if it's taking that long. So,
Yeah.
why is the functional requirement or the validation or the test done that when you click the button, the system responds A, to say an example? If why don't adding like in under X amount of seconds with these many resources, not making Chrome drain all your RAM while you are running that, or not letting you open more than 2 tabs. Some of those things, this non-functional classification is hurting a lot of teams, a lot of customers, that do not think of those steps that are like basic functionality that should be included. I'm going to extend a little bit, like Gaurav, I see mentioned here, all teams should be called non-development, but I would say that also includes us, because at least on performance, I develop my scripts. Many automators develop their automations. So it's those lines, calling these limits, there are intersections in all the QA areas and development project-wise areas. So it hurts.
I want to ask you a follow up, Leandro. So how do you educate your customers about the fact that it is still your functionality that is going to be impacted for whatever you think is a non-functional factor. It is still going to hamper your business, and you should be bothering about this aspect as well when you are talking only about just testing the features.
Yeah, and you very well said it. As a starting point, do I call it to this other type of testing? I generally try to stay away from this non-functional category. I just try to tell the customers, hey, this is the big battery of best practices of QA that you should be doing. Includes performance, security, integration, everything that is considered that word that we don't tell. Non-functional being a little bit like naming Voldemort. And you very well said it. It's customer, you will get this financial, PR, whatever impact in your organization project. It always translates into money, and sadly, most of the time, that's the language that management receives. And even with that, as I said, many of them are like, yeah, sure, you're something, we'll be fine. And then they come back. They already received an impact, lost sales, lost reputation, and many more things that may happen. Low morale employees that have to use internal software, many more things. So yeah, I try to shine out those what if you don't pay attention, and keep it as a standard. Just do it. It's testing, it's QA. Have a good
Yeah.
system.
Well, it's good to see the audience already starting to push out some questions. There is one from my good friend Adebayo Jacobs. Amun. He's asking, is there any test that is non-functional?
I would argue that also functional tests that are considered functional can fall into that perspective or that situation, because I think it was all that with usability and, let's say, security. If you're not allowed to put an emoji or inject an SQL command in your text box, those fall into security and usability. But also, if they don't work, they are not functional. So some of those, that's where I say it's a little bit hurting to try to differentiate or say, okay, this is non-functional from the perspective of who is it doing it. Everything adds up. So I will. It's, in general, in life, don't draw lines in those type of things or on anything.
Yeah, there is another interesting question, and this one I would like Soumya to answer. Soumya, what are the factors that define that an application needs non-functional tests, or in your words, peripheral tests? I'm going to stop using
Thanks for
that term.
adopting that. I highly appreciate. Well, so I've been listening to the points which all my other panelists are mentioning, which is great. And there is no, there's, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm not accepting that. Completely valid, and I'm here representing my point. When we talk about testing, there are a few other factors that gets involved with it. Firstly, being the size of an organization, their revenue model. You're talking about large organizations or an enterprise organizations like SAP, Atos, Windows, Google, Amazon, any of these bigger organizations, you don't see them compromising on any of these tests because it's a bigger game, bigger loss. They know what they're gonna lose, and including managed service companies like TCS, CTS, Infosys, they're all managed company services, which means when they co-create with their partners, they emphasize the importance of this even to their customers. You know, you're gonna miss on this, so it has to be onboarded. We are settled there. But when you come to the other end of the spectrum, which is basically startups or a small organizations, that's where the challenge is, because they're catching their breath up to to keep them running into the business, which is possible only by delivering the functions or the functionality of an application, which can help them buy in more licenses so that there is revenue coming in and they can put it back into their operational cost. So now I walk in as maybe a consultant, or I am a test manager there, and I sit there and say, you know what, you have to invest $100,000 onto this performance testing, and it's very important for us. Few things my CTO will ask me. The first question: okay, we have only 80 customers who are using every 1 month. The footfall is only 80 customers, and they may use occasionally, weekly, once or twice my application. As long as my application is behaving well, like not crossing, taking like 10 minutes to load, that's like non-commonsensical, right? At least we have reached to a point in the technology where when we develop something, things are at least behaving. I'm not sure whose background it is, but it's pretty disturbing. Can you please mute? um, so it can definitely, these are the parameters that definitely affects what testing, to what range of testing, and how deep this testing should go. So when we're talking to the other end of the spectrum is when the challenge is like all other my panelists are mentioning, yes. But if you look at the larger organization, it's not a problem, it's sorted. They have guilds, they have specialized vertical setup in their organization who specifically deep dive into these security, accessibility, user experience, user research, all of these things, because they have enough budget to be shelled out and taken care of for the product specification. So bringing this aspect is very important. What type of customer, what type of organization we're representing, and where the actual problem is. So that's exactly what I want to bring at this point in the discussion.
Well, I do have a counter question for you, Soumya, but I would like Eldar to answer this.
Mm-hmm.
Soumya did mention that, in case she gave an example where, there is only a 80% footfall, 80% footfall, and there is not much of a pressure from the user side and things like that. How do we, uh, what is the need, first of all, to dive deep into something like performance? But then when we talk about these particular set of tests, which we don't want to call as non-functional, and I will personally prefer to call as operational tests, not as non-functional. Okay, I prefer the use of operational, and I was also reading an article from Scott Moore, who's also into performance testing. I was reading his article, and he's also mentioned. In fact, he commented on one of these, the lead up to this discussion on one of the things. There also he mentioned it as operational. So I would like to stick to that term. So, Eldar, how do you counter Soumya's response, because she's specifying certain contexts? Okay. However, what we are talking about is a larger gamut of things. We are not necessarily talking about, certain number of users or something like that. It is something that will affect the entire user base, right? In the long run. So, how do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think that if to put Soumya's point in one catchphrase is desires are infinite, but resources are finite. So if you have limited resources, you start to prioritize your tasks, right? So obviously, if you think that supporting 1 million users is not important for you at the moment, yeah, you probably shouldn't test that, and you probably shouldn't test other aspects if you think that they are not as important or they are lower in priority and you don't have the resources to put into this. It might well be. I don't necessarily agree that it has to be the performance side that has to be settled aside until we have the resources, because maybe some aspect of the quote functional or the peripheral or operational tests that I'm sorry, not peripheral, the behavioral tests that can set aside for now until you have the resources or until you have the time, or you could cut off with the feature set. There's plenty of things that you can do, but it's not immediately true that it has to be the performance or the security or the accessibility aspect that has to settle aside. I mean, there is a huge art to how you prioritize your tasks in a software development, and it's part of the considerations, how many resources you have available to put into it.
Yeah, Absolutely. And I want to extend that by asking a follow-up, but I would like Sandra to respond to that. But before I come to you, Sandra, I just want to tell the audience to keep pushing their questions into the Q&A tab, because if you put it in the chat, it becomes difficult for us to respond to it. So if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A tab. So Sandra, continuing what Eldad was talking about. Now, I want to bring in front of you a different set of activities, or a different set of tests, which are user experience tests. Okay, the UX that we call. Now, UX is a big term. Okay, it encompasses a lot of small little things, usability being one of the aspects of it. That again, need you somebody when a user is interacting with a particular website or a mobile application, they have to feel the functionality. Okay, they have to navigate from one web page to another web page, which is actually a functional test. Okay, or which is actually a functional operation that is happening there, and yet we are choosing to call it non-functional. Why?
See, that's a very complicated question. Now, first of all, it is not going to be non functional, right? You have to move from page one to page two, or you have to do the next action. Now, if an action, say, now let's take this as an example. I am able to move from page one to page two, but it's taking me, like, say, 2 minutes to go there. What do you think is going to happen? The user is obviously just going to abandon that site or the application and move on. That's where you're losing business. That's where you're losing your customers. That's where you're losing your end users to whom you want to present that awesome functionality that you have built, and you want to show them that, see, this is what works here. And but because we're bailing out on, say, something as important as performance testing. Now, when we spoke about resources and prioritization, why would we not prioritize user experience there? User experience is not just like, how the touch and feel is or how the look and feel is. It's also about, like, how quickly the user can actually interact, right? How easily it can interact, how smooth the entire process or the use of the application is. Isn't that the whole purpose of, like, why we are building a particular software? We are putting in that much of efforts, we are putting in that much of, resources to get those functionality up. And while we're actually building out on that, if we prioritize, just say, like, functional testing on it, and say that, non-functional is optional for now, uh, is a user really actually going to go ahead and use it? If, like, and a website's look and feel is, like, really fabulous, but, like, it is just dragging along. Even for that matter, like, so many times, famous websites, right? Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, okay, it's down for, like, say, 20 minutes, and the rest of the applications just blow up. Instagram is down, you'll see Twitter blow up over there with, like, multiple tweets that, Twitter is not, means Instagram is not accessible. So if that can happen to that kind of an application, let's consider, like, the one that Soumya was mentioning, where it's a small organization, say 80 people, right? And say it is something like a call center application or something, or a sales pitch application, with anything for that matter, right? Or as simple as your Zoho or something, where, like, you're using it for your daily task management or something of that sort, and it is down, or it is something which is not very easily accessible, even though, like, the user functionalities, the way the perform, means the entire look and feel, and, every function is actually catering to what you exactly need over there, but you're not able to get the work done quickly. The management is eventually going to take that, decision that, we need to move out of this and, bring up something else apart from this. So if we start, differentiating, say that, this is functional and this is non-functional, and then, like, we try to bifurcate over there, there are going to be losses along the way, is what I can say.
You mentioned Instagram, you mentioned Facebook, Twitter, and you missed the biggest of them all, LinkedIn, which is like
Yes.
which is like an ocean of bugs. Okay, you call them functional or non-functional or whatever. But I want to come to you, Leandro, and I want to ask you, this, that what Soumya was talking about. Now you've just recently traveled, so you've dealt with a lot of these airline websites and these hotel reservation websites and these applications where you can transfer money or pay by pay through your mobile phone instead of just doing, or your normal banking app. Now imagine any of these actually retaining all your data without masking them, and some other users are able to see it just by keying in a few words. So would
That's
it not bother you? And and
oh
and
yeah,
and please tell me, how is that non-functional?
yeah, and that's a very good example. I mean, you were mentioning earlier the airline situation. Actually, I experienced some issues thanks to the systems not being very well tested. Most probably, many of you heard of Southwest having issues this Christmas with a
Oh,
winter
yeah.
storm in the US. The systems went down, and the system was non-functional, not functioning because of this. And yesterday in my travels back home, I experienced some of this. The other airline that I was traveling with, they had this functionality to detect, like, hey, we are having system issues, we are having a big volume, we're having issues. You may see weird things, but be prepared, we're working on it. Which and to me as a user, it's a very good experience, similar to what you say. If they would be exposing my data, non masking it, or just letting it leak all over the internet, I wouldn't feel safe or motivated to check the system and its functions if these type of things are not being taken care of. And it's very interesting as well. From the experience yesterday I had, yeah, my bags were delayed. I'm still waiting for them and things like that. But because they didn't fall into that bias of it's not functional, let's not pay attention to that right now, it's a core of your business that these type of things, big volumes, security. I mean, that's why I don't want to label them as non-functional, because it's everything that you should be taking care of for your business, for your application to be usable. I mean, it's a very good example of all of the other things that we had to take into account by default. One of the other questions: what should I pay attention to? What is functional, non-functional, or what define when my application is non-functional? And I don't want to keep saying that word, that term, but every system needs them all. So that's another one where that's a very good example, Briyesh.
Yeah. So, Soumya, based on what Leandro just said, okay, I'm still coming to pick on you because you are
I'm
you are the
off and
one.
out.
The defensor of
Yeah, I'm
non-functional.
loving it.
No, no. So in such a situation, how what do you say? Okay, when you know that you have a risk on users' data, when you know that okay, people are finding it difficult to navigate from one feature to another feature, and they have to go through multiple steps, and the system has poor usability. Okay, and it is a normal functioning for the user, it's a normal step of the process. Okay, somebody is booking, uh, you know I will just extend the example that I gave in Leandro's case. So once I was keying in my passport details, because the airlines do ask your passport and expiry date and stuff like that, visa and expiry date and all that stuff they ask. So when I was trying to key in, I first typed the first character of my passport, and I could see an entire list of numbers that were keyed in already. And if I just type one of those numbers, it displays the user's information to me. Okay, this was on a live airline website. Okay, somebody had left it open. Okay, whoever was working on that feature had left it open. I could just like that extract, run a crawler and fetch all the information from that website that they had. But I chose to report it to them, and they fixed it, thankfully. But then I have seen it myself, and that's why this question. Now, to come to you, Soumya, we can't just ignore that by saying, oh, it's a peripheral test, right? We will take care of it later. And it is a part of the functionality that the user is dealing with. So how do you address that situation?
Yeah, so firstly, to start with, peripheral does not mean we'll see later. It simply means I'm
Okay.
keeping requirement as an epicenter, and requirement is defined as a functionality of an application, and everything that revolves around it is a periphery for me. And I mention it as also peripheral because if you say performance, any tester, any usual tester, including me, with this 15, 16 years in this industry, I cannot call myself a performance tester because it's a vertical in itself. It's a knowledge in itself where we have to deep dive, know the concepts, know the technology, how to deal with it, and um, provide suggestions how you can improve. What Eldad or Leonardo can do, I can't do it. Right? So it means it's a vertical and a specialization in itself, which an usual agile tester or agile team tester, you may not see them gaining that level of experience or knowledge in their day-to-day life. Right? So when I talk about testing and development teams, for me, the epicenter is a requirement which comes, and that's the one which is earning the bread and butter for a company, right? So that's, and anyone who's associated with testing these functionality is a functional tester. Now coming to the Sandra's point, now there are 2 points I want to mention. One is the need and the want. What is a need? Every business, every application will have or conceived the behavior. When I provide the solution, this is how it's going to behave. These are the functionality. When I move from one page to another, and it has to load with all these data, the content should come and all the animation should work. This is like the basic need. But if I say when I move from one page to another, and usually it takes 3 seconds, but I want to achieve it in 1 second, that is a want, which means you're chiseling it to making it more sharper and bringing that difference in the market to kill your competition, right? So that is what we are talking about. All the basic needs, no company is going to compromise. If they are doing, they have issue with the governance. The governance model has to work. Like the classic example you mentioned, it is an issue with the governance model. It is a bigger play at a large. Okay. So, and no company should be fundamentally working this wrong. That means they have everything wrong in their foundation itself. If the basic needs are taken care, and if they're generating revenue, they're able to keep afloat, that's when the company goes to the next level of chiseling it and bringing in that cut where they can, kill the competition with something else more. And that's why they want to call it as like non-functional, or what they say, keeping it in the second round of the circle, which I don't believe it should be in the second round of a circle personally. But why businesses treat that way is because of this. I hope I made my point.
Well, I have a couple of counter questions, but I would throw it to the rest of you. Sandra, Eldad, or Leandro, if you want to counter Soumya on that. Sandra, you've unmuted yourself, so go ahead.
Yes. So I would like to start by saying that, I agree with Soumya at some point that, when it starts out, like from an agile team, like, if it's a mid-level company or something like that, in an agile team, an agile tester will not have that kind of an expertise to go along the way of, say, performance testing or a security testing. But going back to the point that Leandro mentioned, that when we talk about testing, everything comes into it, right? It is not just functional, it is not just non-functional, it is like everything. It's a whole package. Like you're testing the functionalities, you're testing the accessibility, you're testing the security, the performance, everything. It does not, when we talk about performance, again, one more point that Leandro mentioned was that when we say performance testing, the first thing that comes to people's mind is load testing. So which tool we are going to use, what are we going to know about that tool, how are we going to train on it? So there's a lot of confusion that gets added to it. But when we talk about, like, we want to deliver quality, right? That is the time when you are actually focusing on the nitty gritties, which will get included in the functionality itself. Like the bug that you mentioned, Rajesh, like someone putting in like a few characters and the entire passport details showing up, that could have come up as a functional test. Would we categorize that as a security test when we deep dive into it? Yes, but on the level, on the first look, it will look as a a defect that should not be there, something that is happening wrong. Similarly, when we speak about moving from one page to page two, I'm not talking about something like going from 3 seconds to 1 second, but if we are going from, say from page one to page two in say 5 to 7 seconds, that, distance, that, that much of time that is needed to be waited, even in a single user execution, that is very well, it pops out that, something is wrong, something is happening. Going into the network tab, just, trying to explore it, that is something like anyone even in an agile testing team can do it. But when we start categorizing them that this is functional, this is non-functional, that is where the divide comes into. And that is where there is some kind of a neglect into these kind of areas where accessibility is looked upon, then security is not looked into, performance is not looked into. So when I speak about saying these should get included into functional, it's not like you need to have that expertise in there. It's like you need to at least start, take it as a whole, as a quality, and then move ahead in that direction.
Like, who should take it, Sandra? Is it testers who should take it? Or
It's
is it business?
testing.
They
The
do. Right.
business. Even
Now
the
we come.
business. Now, see, even in the business, right? When we are trying to deliver a product to somebody, when we are pitching the product itself, we say that our product is full of quality. And if during those kind of demos or anywhere, even a slight mishap is shown from the perspective of, say, security, from performance perspective, that is where, that catches their attention. That is where things start going wrong. Even I was working on an application which was quite small. It wasn't accessible with a lot of users, but we could see very evidently that it is dragging along, and we weren't doing any kind of load test over there. It was just a single user test. So if a QA, or if a business, or if the entire agile team is not able to identify those issues on the face of it, and then work towards fixing it, rather than saying that okay, we'll get the functionality out, this issue we'll reprioritize it, take it on for a later date, then that is where that is where the bias is actually happening. Because that bias itself is there that okay, this can be taken care of later on, right now the functionality is working.
So I want to bring three layers here, Sandra. One is a tester should be doing it, checking the network tab, doing a preliminary check, bang on, absolutely. Some are not able to do simply because they're not missing the knowledge, and they literally have to, pick up that knowledge and understand how better they can do the testing. It's about the ability and understanding of the test. I have no comments on that because there are many communities who are doing a talk about it. But if I, as a tester, recognize it, do a preliminary check, and then say, you know what, it's taking like more than a minute and this is wrong, and I report a bug, but my product manager says, well, we have a high functional bug which should be resolved, and let's take this later. Now is where the problem actually arises, and that's where it pricks, simply because they're kind of ignoring and prioritizing something else over the actual performance or the security which matters to us. This is where I fall back into what James Bach or Michael Bolton say: how you have to advocate your bugs, how you have to present your bugs. Everything is economies at play, right? If you're not able to say as a tester, sell it, how this is gonna imply and how it's gonna hurt. Maybe British may not like my answer because, yeah, I'll say that later. um, if you're not able to change it to the economies and say how is it going to impact an application, and from a user perspective, from an economy perspective, from the usage perspective, then we have lost the game as an engineer, as a test engineer, right? And by and large, the way I see, this is where the problem is, the bigger problem, where we have this tug of war. Yeah, I'll leave the stage to Leonardo. Last two words. We have this tug of war to convince the product team that, just take this up. This is equally important. Leonardo.
No, and yeah, thank you. I wanted to add up and comment because you made another, I think, I would say better distinction when you said what are the must and would like to. I believe that this distinction, or calling them functional or non-functional, came from that, and many think like non-functional is like the good to haves, or eventually we will get to them. But and that's a key distinction in even in functional, where I have seen teams that the incentive for them is to get as many tests as possible, as many defects identified, and some incentives that are not the best for QA. And they start to test things that are functional in that category. But yeah, I'm looking that the color appears green, that some negative input testing and some things that are like, why are you wasting time on that? Or maybe just measure the response time of this, or check that you cannot type forbidden words, or some other things that, as I mentioned earlier, SQL injections or some of those things. I think that's a critical part, and many teams and organizations have a tough time, and that's why they say, let's just divide functional and non-functional, where it's like, no, just take a look into what your business really needs, what is really going to affect it, and what should they be testing, whatever called, if you want to call it functional and non-functional, Pepe or Juan or whatever you want to call them. Do what is transcendent for your system, right? I think that's the point that you were trying to deliver.
Yeah, and I want to take on that, Leandro. Now, airlines are my favorite websites for testing because you see a lot of these things. Now, recently, I also did a booking, and trust me, to check in, I had to go through 5 clicks. Normally, usually it's just go to manage booking and then key in your PNR and your last name, and you should have the check-in thing. But there were 5 different clicks that I had to do, and then I had to scroll down all the way to the bottom of the page where it said check-in, a very small button. Now, for me, I am the only user at that point of time. I know that there may be many people, so performance I'm not talking about. I'm just talking about usability. That for me is not a usable system. Okay, as a
True.
user, I reject it. The functionality, the purpose of check-in, which is a feature of that airline website, which is something that a customer would expect, is not met. So it is a big glaring failure there. Now
There
to
was no
call it
usability test. You can
yeah, to
tell.
call it
Yeah.
non-functional by any means of imagination is not done. And for me, Soumya, sorry, but it is not a peripheral thing also. Not many people will be using it. Every customer will use it. It is a basic functionality. Now, before, we've got 2 minutes, and Eldad is trying to say something, but I want to ask you something very specific on this regard. Is it because we have created a distinction between generalists and specialist testers that you see that this terminology of non-functional is proliferating even more and more, saying the people who are focusing on non-functional are specialists, for example, a performance tester, or a security tester, or a usability tester, something like that. Is it because of that, or
No,
is it
no,
something?
I don't think that niching. Okay, so each, just like as any other developer has his niche. Okay, so you have your front end developer and you have your back end developer and DBA and system engineer and stuff like that. It doesn't mean that one thing is more important than the other. It just means that it's a niche. It's something that it's a field of expertise that one individual has better than everybody else. So this is the T-shaped skill set or the pie-shaped skill set, stuff like that. So I don't think that speciality is what driven this style of thinking. I think it's more the terminology. Now, I'm about to throw a catchphrase, it's a very famous catchphrase, and I want to see Leandro's reaction to this. Leandro, look to the camera. I'm going to throw this catchphrase. Premature optimization is the root of all evil. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, I'm also. Oh man, that's
Yeah.
another full panel.
Yeah, it is, but it is related because this is how a phrase can be taken out of context to mean a very different thing and cause these destructive phenomena that we talked about. So, premature optimization actually means don't optimize your code intuitively. Don't go by gut feeling and hope to optimize your code. Profile your code first, okay, and then make improvement where you see the problems. Okay, but when people take this catchphrase out of context, they thought that this phrase actually means don't optimize your code early on in the life cycle of your application development, and this
Which
is
goes
wrong.
totally against shift left.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's totally against everything that we know. Well, take this into a context that
Rephrase the catchphrase.
Yeah, this catchphrase is from 1968, right? It's the art of computer programming by Donald Knuth. Okay, he is the one who is responsible for this. But what he actually meant is profile your code. Okay, and after you detect those bottlenecks, now you can improve it. Okay, and you can also prove that your optimization really did what it's supposed to do. Otherwise, you just go by gut feeling, and you're setting yourself up. You're shortchanging yourself. But performance considerations are part of your total development efforts, and they should be prioritized against all the others, and they should be considered. Okay, they are a part of the entire life cycle of your application development.
Excellent. Well, we have just completed our time. Unfortunately, this seems like an incomplete discussion. I wish we had more time, but I want to thank all the panelists for joining in and sharing your views. Leandro, you were joined right after a travel. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Soumya. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajesh. It has been a pleasure, really.
It's nice to be a devil's advocate. Thank you.
It is.
Thank you, Brijesh, and thank you
I
everyone
want to thank
watching.
Thank you,
Synapse
Brajesh.
QA I want to thank Synapse QA for organizing this and especially for giving me an opportunity of hosting this. Nitin knows my pulse, so he's picked it up right. Thank you, Nitin, and thank you to the entire Synapse QA community. Thank you to all the audience for joining in for the questions, and I hope to see you soon again in the discussion. Bye.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Goodbye.